welcome to this session. I think since there are only a few of us, maybe we could just go around the room and introduce ourselves, say who we are and where we're from, and then we would begin to work at what our tasks are for this breakout session. So my name is Michael Blair, and I serve as the General Secretary for the United Church of Canada. I'm located in Toronto, and I've been a part of the international planning team for this conference for, it feels like forever, but it's been a few years. And I'm looking forward as we continue this conversation. Barbara, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I'm Reverend Barbara Breland, and I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm a member of Paul and Pauline, and excited to be here.
Okay, thank you. Carmela?
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I'm here from North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina. I'm also a member of Paul and Pauline, and just while I'm here, Angelique, phenomenal. Thank you so very much for your hard work. This is beyond expectation. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Emo?
Hi, good morning to everybody. Coming from Toronto, Emo Yango, and I work with the United Church of Canada. And one of my work pieces in my portfolio is racial justice, as well as the International Decade for People of African Descent, working along with young people. Thanks.
Thank you. And it's Lisa, is it? Lisa, are you there?
Yes, good morning. I had to figure out how to work this. Good morning, everyone. I'm new here. I got this this opportunity to join you, and great work, everyone. I'm just blown away by what I'm learning. I'm with the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I live in Mesa, Arizona, and I work with prison ministry and social justice. And all of this is new and exciting to me. I've been learning so much. So thank you for the invite.
Sheila?
My name is Sheila Sisulu. I'm a South African. I am a former vice president of the South African Council of Churches and worked with Frank Chikane, and have been interested in this matter for the longest possible time. Thank you.
Is it Nduzizi?
Morning, everyone. It's Tuduzi Mbada from South Africa, Gauteng. I'm the head of policy for the Gauteng provincial government. Very much interested in this work because of the aspects that we deal with where we are. The lady that just spoke now, I remember very well in our youth days about the work that we must do as young people in some of these areas, Mesisulu. So really, it's quite fascinating, and we're looking forward to this beautiful work. Thank you.
Angelique.
Thank you, Michael. Angelique Walker-Smith. I hail from a number of places, Pauline, PAW, AAD, National Baptist Convention, USA Incorporated, WCC, Just ask me whichever day you like, and I'll tell you which one I'm most closely aligned with in the moment. But my parents call me Angelique, so that's just as good.
Thank you. One of the things we need to identify is someone to be a rapporteur who will take some notes of our conversation.
All right.
And
Ready to go look at a house.
offer them back to the plenary. So would somebody be willing to be our rapporteur? No volunteers?
Okay.
Thank you, Camilla.
Bless your heart.
Towards the end of the session, unfortunately, I have to leave partway through, and Angelique will pick it up. We'll need to kind of just do a summary of what we will be feeding back into to the plenary at the end of the session. So as you know, this process has involved I've come at this from, because the intention was for it to be a working, learning process. At the very outset, we decided that we would arrange for a number of regional consultation to begin the conversation in preparation for this conference. And regionally, we were all asked to try and organize conversations in our region about the challenges facing African descendant folks in our context, recognizing that across the globe, African and African descendant folks face significant challenges in seeking to live the fullness of life, which is ours, and to build on the Manchester conference, and to work with some of the issues that were being raised through the UN Decade for People of African Descent. Certainly for those of us in North America, the challenges of the legacy of the transatlantic slave experience, the economic imbalance that we continue to face, the oppression, the challenges around policing, and all those factors have continued to impact us. In the Canadian context, unfortunately, we didn't end up having a formal kind of process, and part of that is because of the fact that in the Canadian context, we don't have a narrative that holds all of us in the Canadian context who are people of African descent. You may or may not be aware that in the Canadian context, the people of African and African descent is quite diverse. We have folks from the Caribbean, folks from Africa, folks from Latin America, folks from Europe, and there's no kind of common narrative that holds our experience together. And whereas in our neighbors to the south, the US, there is the kind of lived memory and experience of slavery. In the Canadian psyche, that's not there. And in fact, in the Canadian context, we have to keep reminding folks that slavery existed in Canada. And Canadians have the sense that we're not like our neighbors to the south, that we are better than our neighbors to the south. And so to find a common kind of narrative or experience that hold us together has been a challenge, and particularly in the context of the church system. So trying to get people together to have the conversation has been a real challenge for us. One of the things we did in the context of the United Church of Canada, where I serve, was that we brought together a group of young Black students to do a research project on looking at the issues and challenges of racism in our context. And so that was one of the ways in which we contributed in the Canadian context to our thinking into this conversation. So that's just a quick overview of where we are in the Canadian context. And I'll invite Angelique to talk about some of the work that was done in the US context in preparation for this conference.
Michael, thank you so much. Those remarks were very helpful in helping us to frame the North American challenges relative to common narratives and the great diversity. Thank you so much. I think that the analysis is very helpful, and even in the US context, whereby we do have those who are children of the enslavement period. We also do have at least 5 reiterations of arrivals of those who have come from Africa to the United States, as well as those from south of the United States to the United States. And I think the reconfiguring of relationships and conversations is taking place even in this moment. As past generations since the 1970s and 80s, many who went to our HBCUs, and then those who came later based on various challenges of conflict, or those who just chose to be here and the immigration policies allowed it for particular openings, or those who came over who have not yet been embraced in terms of the legal, so-called legal documentation in this moment. So the US is very much a fluid situation relative to the various narratives that bring people of African descent, to refer to President Mbeki's term in the general, broadest strokes, to the US context as we understand it. It is important to note as well, people of African descent in the United States have been there pre-enslavement period as well. And sometimes that history is not told as it ought to be. So there really are at least 5 entry points in which people of African descent have been in the US territories, even before we were states and before there were territories. And so as we talk about people of African descent, President Mbeki's words around understanding that wherever we are, we have this descendancy of being Africa, I think is key. It is key to how we move together for the future, which this conference is seeking to address, which Manchester 1945 addressed, and 1900, and even previous to that. It's just that the Pan-African Congresses started in 1900, but those conversations were happening even before that. I think of people in the US context like Frederick Douglass, for example, and others who were having this conversation. Frederick Douglass, who was sent to Haiti as an ambassador during his time, as well as being an abolitionist for people of African descent, but also for women. He was very involved in the women's suffrage movement as well. So as we are thinking about this moment, in a way, we're doing a kind of 180 in a way. We're really going back to the future, if you will. And that's very important as we have this conversation, particularly when we think about the continent of Africa, who we, even by anthropologist notions, have said the first person, the first humanoid was Lucy, right, from Ethiopia. So we have to be really open to the fluidity of rewriting the narrative. This is such important work, and it is decolonizing knowledge. And it has been particularly directed in one way or the other. Okay, those are my opening comments to pick up on you. But in the US context, in terms of pre-webinars that we've had several of them. We've had one on reparations with the Washington consortium of people who are dealing with Africa and people of African descent. We've partnered with Africans Diaspora and Africans Rising around conversations around the UN decade. We've had conversations also about racism as well. So there are any number of webinars that we have had. We've also had the Pan-African Women's Halloween conferences, which have been a part of this series. And I'm so pleased that there are about 3 or 4 of you here who have found your way into this conversation. So I won't name all of the pieces, but those are some of the pieces in which we have done in the US context that have yielded anywhere from 50 to close to 200 people in a webinar, just depending on the event. So we've been very active, but always supportive of our Canadian counterparts. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Angelique. And just one other thing to add in terms of the Canadian context is that we recognize that, and this process for me has been helped to clarify that in the Canadian context, we tend to draw on the US narratives to tell our stories rather than the Canadian narrative, and partly because we don't know the Canadian narrative. So, for example, when we celebrate Black History Month, we tend to look to the heroes, sheroes of the US and not the Canadian ones. And so some of us have been doing work in kind of identifying the Canadian stories to bring to light so that we aren't necessarily dependent on the US narrative all the time. We have also recognized one of the things just triggered by what you said, Angelique, is that in the Canadian context, we are missing, and there's a group of us who are trying to think about this, we're missing a kind of Black theological reflection about our experiences, Black Afro-descendant folks within the context of the Canadian. And so again, we tend to draw on people like James Cone to articulate a story, but it's not totally our stories because of the difference in the Canadian context. And so the challenge of this moment for us, I think, is multifold. One is that being able to articulate a kind of Black Afro-descendant Canadian theological framing, and it's also to recapture a narrative that enables us to be able to come together across our diversities. And in some ways, the struggle around policing, struggle around racism doesn't totally pull us together to deal with the challenges that we face. Right. So I don't know if folks want to engage any of what Angelique or I have said around just this context piece. We have a number of questions we've been asked to attend to, but let's just pause for a moment in case others want to offer any reflections about what you've heard from Angelique and myself.
Michael, may I add 2 other people I think have joined? We might want to have them introduced as well.
So Alice, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Alice Thomas. I'm from Howard University School of Law, and I'm from the Midwest, from St. Louis. So person of African descent, but yes, so drawn to the conference to understand what's going on and what the conversations are.
Welcome. And is it Sashida?
Hi, good, well, wherever you are, salutations. My name is Sasheda Young. I am the Pan-African Young Adult Network convener for Bread for the World. I'm really excited to be here. I have questions, but I want to hear the presentation, so I'm going to hold off because mine are more geared towards my own little idiocracies. But I graduated from Howard University School of Divinity, and my concentration was in social justice and ethics, where I was also the last mentor for Dr. Kane Hopefelder, of course, the editor of the African Heritage Bible. So I'm just really excited to be here with you all, connected through Angelique. And yeah, thank you all for being here.
Thanks. And Sarah.
Hello, hi, I'm new, I'm Sarah. Are we just doing introductions?
Yeah, just say who we are.
Sure, hi, my name is Sarah Joshrath. I am American Beninese. I am a doctoral student at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, and I am focusing in Francophone studies, more specifically women Beninese writers of the 21st century.
Thanks, welcome.
Thank you.
So if there's no interaction with what is said, can we turn to the questions? And if you look in the chat, there are a number of questions that you can, that we're asked to engage in. The first question is, how will Africans and people of African descent found themselves where they are? Not sure if there are any additions to what has been said. Go ahead, Camilla.
I think you mentioned about the difficulties in collecting and having that information and that historical perspective. And what I just want to say to you and remind people of is that here in the United States, there's an absolute war on the telling from a truthful perspective, the history of African descendants in these United States. So we are finding ourselves in a place of backlash and protecting that history and ensuring that there's a true and accurate telling of our stories. And what that means is that we absolutely must take ownership and leadership in ensuring that those stories are told. So that's the only.
All right. Any other comments?
Well, I'm gonna shut your door because I'm on a conference.
There's a question. Can you repost the questions? Because we don't see the questions in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
guess
we'll
the
do
folks
that in
who
just a moment, and maybe the people came
I
in
can
later.
do it, Angela.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right. So the second question is, what if peoples of African descent, to use President Mbeke's terminology, done to undo the impact of the history of slavery, transatlantic slave trade, colonization, dictatorship, etc., on their lives?
Well, I think it kind of gets back a little bit to what Carmela was saying, was to retell the narrative. I know that's one of the things that we're definitely focusing on in Pauline, is that we tell those stories of Pan-African women from 1614, 1800s to present, and that we definitely tell them from the voices of women and our shared experiences. And even as we listened to our presenters yesterday in the Women's Pre-Conference, they were talking about how to definitely deal with our traumas and talk about them in a communal space, which also brings healing so that we can move forward. So that is a way also of decolonizing the impact of colonization on us, and Pan-African women owning our histories and our journeys and not being ashamed of them, and trying to tell these stories, not even trying, but telling these stories to our children and the generations behind us, so that they move forward in pride and move forward with power and with energy, so that they can take the journey to the next level. As one of the speakers said this morning, that each generation must discover what their work is and do it. And I think the next level of that is pass it on to the next generation so that they can take it to the next level.
Hi, my name is Shada Young again. I wanted to piggyback off of what was already said. Throughout the work that the Pan-African Young Adult Network with Bread for the World has been doing is a series of webinars. We were successful in having our second year of our webinar series. And so I must say that storytelling is a big deal. Just being able to see the representation brings about a sense of intergenerational connection. Now, what we found is even in having these young adult webinars, which is actually open to everyone to attend, we had different fields, in particular dealing with the connection of the arts, talking about criminal justice, Black farming. It's various topics, but it is, there are some links on the BREAD website. But one thing, oh, and also political representation was a big one, definitely. It highlights young adults in particular that are already out there doing the work. And so it gives an opportunity for persons to see young adults in a different way. Sometimes young adults still feel like they're just the secretary or the fill-in person or the person that's there with muscles, but not necessarily where the torch is being passed. And so what our webinars have provided is a tangible way to show that the torch is not only being passed, but it's still very much well lit. And so we've done a lot as far as partnerships and connections, and we've learned along the way. And so we're hoping that it grows to be more of a recruitment tool. But once again, that needs to be something that's expressed. And so I can ask you all just continue to look throughout for different things that the Pan-African Young Adult Network, PAYAN, are doing. It'll be on the Bread for the World website. But yes, I must say that it has definitely inspired persons throughout to see successful young adults in different fields across the network. And so also we're looking for having some more international persons to join us. And so we are just honored to be represented on here today, well, this week.
Thanks. Angelique, I need to turn over to you. I have to go do a presentation at my local church. So,
Michael, thank you so much for your leadership.
thanks, folks. Good to be with you.
And we'll see you
See
tomorrow.
you later. And yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, Michael, so much. I see Sheila's hand is up.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I've just finished reading a book by Barbara Masekela. Many of you will know Hugh Masekela. And it's on the issue of storytelling and how it is assumed that growing up with a grandmother, you lived the oral tradition. And what she struggles with in the book, which is probably not unique, is how the horrors of the two wars in South Africa, Anglo war wars in South Africa, were such that her grandmother could never speak of that. It was who she calls the sister grandmother, who sometimes would open up. But there was an unwritten rule that what happened was so painful, so almost disempowering, emasculating for the men, the defeat where land was taken by force, that these have not been weaved into what we normally call the oral tradition and storytelling. So I think I'm posing a question. In 2021, how do we return to storytelling in such a way that the younger generation appreciates why we are here, how we got here, and what needs to be done to regain our humanity. So it's, I was just triggered by the issue of storytelling, which Barbara is raising as not such an easy thing. If a grandmother was raped, it's not, it's not going to come to a grandchild very easily, that part of her lived experience as a person of a woman of African descent. That had to happen. Okay, thank you.
Sheila, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that is the heritage most of us share, that the older generations lived in such horror. I even say a terrorist state. I do think the US was a terrorist state. Some say it still is, as well as Canada, as well as other parts of the world where we reside. And when you're living under terror, you're trying to survive. And you certainly don't want your children to be, quote, misguided to their own death. I mean, that's just how serious our history has been. So I want to thank you for saying that I believe we all have elders who chose to keep the stories to themselves because they wanted two things, I think. One, to maintain their own dignity. That was the first point. But then some of them also wanted to protect their children, that somehow that they would have a life that would be better than what they had experienced, and to give them, if you will, a new opportunity to do something new. I know that's part of my own personal narrative, and it may be for others, but just to say, I think this is a storytelling dynamic that maybe many of us share. We are down, unfortunately, to just 9 minutes because we do need to return at 45 minutes past the hour. I would invite any of us to just take a question that is in the list. There's still several there. What the international team really needs right now is, what is the way forward? What is a way forward? We have an idea of having a global Pan-African network that might also be associated somehow with the things President Mbeki talked about, like the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, the UN Decade, but it would have its own civil society linkages together coming out of this conference, aligned with other movements. Is there room in your thinking around that possibility? But more than that, this is a space for you to say what would be helpful going forward. How might we be organized beyond this conference? There will be a declaration, a manifesto of some sort. What would you like to see in there? What are the recommendations you would make? Now, do know we will come back together, of course, by Friday, after having this sojourn together, to make sense of what a declaration, a manifesto will look like. We already know the crafting of the conference. Most of you, if not all of you, should have received the information page with the invitation around the different rubrics of how we are formulated for AAD. What would you offer and this maybe allow everyone to give a comment, maybe 30 seconds or less, of what you think is a way forward. So Carmela, who's so kindly been able to volunteer to take the notes, she can put this in the notes, and then we can come back to revisit later during the week, and also to use the chat. Me and Michael also are here by email to be reached out to if you have thoughts along the way that we should be thinking about as we formulate the manifesto, the declaration, and how we go forward. But this should be a starting space. So can each of you say for about 30 seconds, pick any of the questions, keeping that in mind. We're trying to figure out a way forward. And then let's try to conclude so that our rapporteur, who is Carmela, will have a time to summarize what she's going to present. So can we quickly do that? Anyone can start. Please, if you could do that within like 30 seconds, give everybody a chance. That would be so important. Thank you so much.
I can start really quick. My name is Sarah. I teach French at university, so I think it would maybe be interesting to think of, for scholars here in the United States, really kind of what our role can be and how pedagogically we could share these narratives. I know with second language learning, especially French, it is very central in metropolitan French. So I always try to, even if it's a change of name or a change of context, then I always try to diversify the information to show the whole Francophonie. So maybe some information talking about teaching as far as maybe, what kinds of things we could put in our knapsack for teaching students.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll go, Angelique. The sister Sheila, that was so powerful what you just said, and it particularly rang with me, resonated with me. And what we're seeing here in my community, my state has decided to build a Civil War Reconstruction Museum to pay, they deny it, but to pay homage to the lost cause. And the thing they keep asking of us as formerly enslaved people is to tell them our stories. And we do not have those stories in the same way as the oppressor, those that enslaved us had, because we were not allowed to read and write. It was illegal for us to do so. Our stories were so traumatic that many people have chosen not to tell those. Even the stories of our births and our children, those stories are suppressed. And so one of the things that I see in this journey is that we as a people are going to have to try and work through the healing and the trauma, because these stories must be told. And the further along we go, the more we lose the stories. They're just not going to be there. So I think that's one of the things we do have to focus on, is capturing from whomever we can and wherever we can, and find ways of storing and creating catalogs of those stories.
Carmela, thank you. We're down to just a couple minutes. Can please everyone write in the chat? I see some people have already started doing it. Put in the chat what you would recommend very quickly, and then we can take one more speaker, but I really want to hear what Carmela wants to say as a summary, because she will be representing us in the plenary as our rapporteur. So anyone quickly want to add, but then put it in the chat? Everyone, please respond in the chat. We need to hear from you. This is very powerful. Is there one other speaker who wants to go very quickly, and then we can hear from Carmela?
Sure. I put my part in the chat. The biggest part was for the storytelling piece from a young adult perspective. What I found to be most successful is creating those safe spaces for people to feel comfortable to share, but also feel comfortable to listen. And so understanding and putting on that spiritual ear, that empathetic energy within ourselves. And so that ties back into the theological piece. As a former educator, I found myself often having to use differentiated instruction with pieces of our history to motivate our students to want to continue to learn, to understand the purpose of what they're doing, about really why it's bigger than just them, beyond just knowing how to use your money at a store, but learning how to be in control of finances, which is a deeper topic of stewardship. And so tying that back into community building, and even the part where it was mentioned that yes, we do traditionally have given by word of mouth, but again, that's something to be proud of, because it's not just word of mouth. It had a rhythmic tone to it, a syncopated tone. There were always different ways that we told, and when we lost the respect of the griot, there were that definitely caused that intergenerational connection. And biblically, we know it's important for us to have our history maintained in every way that possible for 3 generations, because you're right, after 3 generations, it loses its way, because we don't talk to our primary resources, which are our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our relatives, our community. It's bigger than just looking on Google, because that's not a primary resource, right? And so I would just encourage you, if you don't do the webinars, set up a space like in your church. You know, sometimes kids just like to come eat. I found just setting up a place for food and, you know, social
Shada, I'm
gatherings.
so sorry to interrupt, but we're like at 10 seconds. So I just want to make sure, thank you so much. Everyone is written in the chat.
And my email is in the chat, so we're good to go.
Great. So Carmela, please save the chat so that you can capture everything that was there as well. Do you want any quick words, Carmela, to share with us about what you will say, just very, very quickly, just generally speaking?
Generally,
Dr. Johnson, welcome.
Generally, everyone really focused on the central space of capturing, telling, accessing our stories. From our neighbors to the north in Canada, speaking to an inability to share their own stories, their dependency on some of the stories that are told in the United States, to the pain and trauma of telling our stories, to opportunities for us to share stories, and engagement in the youth within our communities to tell those stories. If I left out anything key, please tell me.
No, thank you so much. And please, everyone save the chat, but especially Carmela, so we can capture everything. I think we have to go into the main hall. Please look in the chat. You'll see the link to return to the plenary. Please return there now. Thank you, everyone. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much. We will return together at another point. God bless.